I've been reading afterlife evidence and psychical research books for well over 20 years and find, as I get less young, that my memory regarding just what I have read is declining. Nonetheless, there are certain books I still recall with gratitude. An early one was this, Best Evidence. Its author was Michael Schmicker. First published in 2002, it became a bestseller, and as an introductory book to anomalous experiences that he describes as impossible phenomena that refuse to disappear, it fulfills a very useful role, ranging widely, if not intensively, over many psychic subjects, from extrasensory perception through poltergeists, dowsing, ghosts, life after death, reincarnation, mediums, near-death experiences, and more, and all in just 276 pages. So if you're not already well read in this area, I recommend this volume. One of its joys is its historical perspective, providing a useful context as the book proceeds. And the author insists that scientists regarding paranormal topics as simply impossible are themselves simply incorrect. And he sets out to show why. But this doesn't prevent the use of this cheeky title for his first chapter. Nobody really believes in this stuff, right? What he stresses is the gulf between scientists committed to materialism and the increasing number of non-scientists willing to accept these topics as simply part of a bigger reality. He scoured the opinion polls and found the popular image of a typical paranormal believer, at least when his book came out, as being gullible, possibly unbalanced, with low social, educational and economic status. But this became unrealistic as scientists increasingly accepted the evidence, with the scientific community no longer being uniformly hostile to a world beyond the five senses. And this trend has been accelerating since Schmicker's book came out. Part 2 of Best Evidence jumps right in with the important topic of extrasensory perception, or ESP, perceiving without the inputs of sight, hearing, touch, taste and smell. ESP encompasses telepathy, which is distant communication between two minds, clairvoyance, or seeing remotely, and precognition, or perceiving the future. And this author tells of a young boy, Eugene, within his own extended family, who had more than one correct premonition. When at boarding school in Switzerland in 1870, he had a persistent dream that his beloved stepmother was about to die. But his schoolmasters refused to let him return home since they had received no communication regarding any illness. But later, as the boy was patently very worried, they relented. He set out on foot in deep snow, crossing the mountains, catching a train, and arriving home at 11 p.m. the next night to discover that his mother had died 6 hours previously. On another occasion, when by now he was a Roman Catholic pastor, Eugene announced the death of his father to his congregation, having no evidence that he'd died, except a letter arrived later confirming this. Also, he foresaw the death of his former art teacher. When's confirmation arrived 2 weeks later, he recalled that she died at the exact same time as his premonition. All these incidents involved no reliance on our normal senses, so clearly something else is involved in ESP. Schmicker then turns to the research of Dr. J.B. Rhine, whom I've never previously mentioned in my videos. He became famous for his paranormal research at Duke University at Durham, North Carolina in the 1930s and 40s, where he obtained the first American doctorate in psychical research, and he's now regarded as the father of parapsychology. Despite his doctorate, however, Dr. Rhine and his wife Louisa had originally been planning to work in forestry, that is, before they attended a lecture by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle on afterlife evidence, while Doyle was touring the United States from England. So they changed direction, taking up psychical research instead, for 37 years, until his retirement from Duke. And then, remaining in Durham, he established the Foundation for Research on the Nature of Man in 1965, which later became the Rhine Research Centre, no longer affiliated with the university. The important thing Rhine realised was that skeptics would only be persuaded by evidence that could be demonstrated repeatedly in a laboratory setting, using strict experimental controls, and his decision to provide this stricter evidence set parapsychology on a new course, away from the topic of survival after death that interests me. Rhine saw ESP as commonplace, not supernatural, with his research developing repetitive protocols anyone could use. With regard to telepathy, he designed this set of 25 Zener cards. Using these, he could test whether one participant, the sender, using their mind only, could inform another person, the receiver, what was on the card. This even included when the sender and receiver were in different locations. These cards could also be used as a guessing exercise, with the participant trying to predict what the next card to be turned up would be. Early on, one of Rhine's best results managed to record 26 straight hits consecutively. The higher the number of correct guesses, the less likely it was explainable by chance. Rhine also conducted clairvoyance experiments where the sender was removed from the exercise and the receiver had to predict the correct card before turning it over. This was even conducted with the target cards being 4,000 miles away. And Rhine came to the conclusion that precognition and clairvoyance were actually two aspects of the same ability. Keen to demonstrate ESP as a normal ability, not just a gift of exceptional people, he was able to show that even average folk could demonstrate ESP, although highly motivated people were better at it, and he found that with endless repetitions, the subject's positive results declined. Compared with her husband, Louisa Rhine preferred spontaneous cases. She analysed precognitive dreams or experiences foreseeing the future, and she investigated whether perceiving forthcoming calamities could help avoid undesirable outcomes, or whether fate was actually inflexible. In one case, the driver of a Los Angeles streetcar dreamed his tram was involved in a road accident at an intersection. A red truck made an illegal turn in front of him. In this crash, he dreamt that 2 men were killed and a woman was injured, and that the woman shouted at him, "You could have avoided this." The following day, the identical situation occurred in reality at such an intersection, yet the accident was avoided since the driver already knew to slam on his brakes. Louisa Rhine collected 14,000 cases from the general public, and Michael Schmicker comments that such a huge number could not be the consequence of hoax, mental illness, poor memory, or wishful thinking. The impact of the Rhine's research was positive. By the 1970s, scientists widely acknowledged ESP as either an established fact or a likely possibility, although die-hard skeptics remain unconvinced. Nonetheless, these experiments were acceptable because they were repeatable and backed by probability assessments using statistical analysis. To illustrate, if 1,850 cards were guessed using the 25 Zener cards, the average number of correct guesses, according to chance, would be 370. In practice, one student made 558 correct predictions, the statistical odds against chance being 22 billion to 1, and such results were not unique. There's far more in this book about ESP than I can cover here, but included is a discussion of the Honiton-Gansfield research of 1989 by the Koestler Parapsychology Unit of Edinburgh University. This caused the New Scientist to describe these studies as, quote, no longer the stuff of cranks and frauds, since they were leaving skeptics scratching their heads. His chapter on PK tells us that one of the first persons to propose experiments into mind over matter was actually Francis Bacon in the 16th century, who inspired the growth of modern Western science. He suggested a study applying imagination as a means of influence the outcome of throwing dice. Schmicker himself reports on attending a psychokinesis party in which many people were taught how to bend spoons with their minds only, and he watched impressive examples of bending stronger aluminium rods and, on one occasion, a 1-inch thick steel bar. Skeptics assure us this involves cheating, but scientists are increasingly willing to think otherwise. My own documentary on the testing of Uri Geller has much more to say on this topic. Large-scale PK phenomena have been witnessed in the presence of mediums, says Schmicker, when tables have been tilted, heavy furniture moved and tables levitated into the air without physical pressure on them. He highlights 2-star mediums, Daniel Douglas Hume in the 19th century, about whom I've made a documentary, seen here, and the Italian peasant woman Eusapia Palladino, of whom more mention will be made later. The question Schmicker does not clarify, however, is whether these mediums were achieving such PK effects with their minds only, or with the assistance of invisible spirit entities. Probably the most startling example of PK success came from a New York artist, Ingo Swann. While working with physicist Professor Hal Puthoff in California, he was credited with altering the magnetic field in a magnetometer encased in an iron vault and protected by 4 different shielding methods used to prevent outside influences. Later, Swann went on to become a star performer in the US government's secret Stargate remote viewing defense program. And I must mention other researchers whose experiments were devoted to deflecting random events with the power of the mind only. In this they reached new heights using electronic equipment. This is Robert Jahn and his colleague Brenda Dunn of the Princeton Engineering Anomalies Research Laboratory. They ran hundreds of experiments in which participants tried to influence the output of a random event generator. Jahn also developed this random mechanical cascade that dropped 9,000 polystyrene balls down a cascade designed like a pinball machine, seen here. The participants had the job of influencing with their minds alone whether more balls would fall to the right or the left of the machine than could be predicted according to chance. A 1989 analysis of 800 such experiments found these random machines could indeed be influenced by intention only, with odds of more than 1 trillion to 1 against the results being due merely to chance. Turning now to other subjects in this book, let's take a look at dowsing, on which I made a short documentary myself in 2019. Dowsing, Fact or Fiction is still available on YouTube. Schmicker's chapter is well worth reading, not least since it summarises 6 scientific studies, plus more anecdotal evidence. For example, the New York Times reported that US Marines in the Vietnam War used dowsing to supplement their high-tech equipment when seeking water, and also hidden ammunition, caches of food and booby traps. US General Patton, seen here, also reportedly used a skilled dowser to locate fresh water in his North African campaign in response to the German forces blowing up desert water wells as they retreated before the advancing Allied army. Turning to Chapter 10, we find a discussion on deathbed visions featuring 3 cases, including the Osis and Haraldson deathbed survey of over 5,000 such visions, and the Lady Barrett case. This latter one echoes one of my own documentaries, The Afterlife Views of Sir William and Lady Barrett, produced in 2021. There's an emotional video too, Daisy Dryden's Deathbed Visions, in which a sick young girl makes numerous lucid remarks about the nature of the afterlife, which she claims to be able to see with her mind's eye, just a few days before she died. Now, if you look to best evidence to read the chapters on mediums and reincarnation, you'd have a remarkably good historical overview of the whole psychical world, from the Chinese using Ouija boards 4,000 years ago, and Pythagoras too in ancient Greece, right up to the present day. For me, being reacquainted with this book has demonstrated just how interesting psychical history can be, and it foreshadows two of Michael Schmicker's later books, not least this one entitled The Gift, which he wrote with Dr. Sally Ryan Feather, director of the Ryan Research Centre, the daughter of Dr. J.B. Ryan, and a retired clinical psychologist with a lifelong interest in parapsychology. This second book discusses the spontaneous ESP cases Dr. Sally Ryan Feather has collected in modern times, together with her mother's older cases. To illustrate what we're talking about, here's a report from a couple who visited Washington, D.C. for a short vacation. On their way home, they were driving past the Pentagon, one of the many places they'd come to see. And when the wife, Marie, looked over to take in the view, what she witnessed was huge billowing black smoke pouring out of the building like a bomb had gone off, with dense smoke ascending into the sky. She screamed, thinking they'd be involved in a road accident, but the highway was open and uncrowded. Yet she became so emotional, she almost hyperventilated. And then she experienced herself literally falling into the Pentagon building, plunging forward and down, and she felt overwhelmed. But her husband pointed out that the Pentagon building was not on fire, and then she too realised that indeed it wasn't, but she was still shaken by this experience. 2 weeks later, Marie's precognitive vision came true, when on September the 11th, 2001, American Airlines Flight 77 smashed into the Pentagon, killing 184 people. This crash set off fires with huge quantities of billowing black smoke. There's plenty to discuss about this case. For instance, what does it say about the nature of time and space, and even about fate, when an event is witnessed before it happens? Dr. Ryan Feather's research centre contains thousands of spontaneous cases, from which she chose 191 for Michael Schmicker's book. So what can we learn from it? Firstly, these phenomena are not specific to just one period of time or one culture. They are universal human experiences, with, for example, dozens of reports stretching back to the 1920s of mothers sensing from a distance when their children are in danger. And I'll come to other generalizations soon, but let's realize there are three separate types of account: precognition, or prediction; clairvoyance, or being able to see beyond ordinary human perception; and telepathy, extrasensory communication between minds. Most cases involve people linked emotionally to the experiencer. 40% are about parents, children, siblings and spouses, and distance, space and time do not hinder these perceptions. Just 14% of ESP accounts are concerned with people in more remote relationships, such as boyfriends, girlfriends, neighbours, employers or colleagues. The point being that most emotionally close people are interested in each other's health and welfare, which seems to activate this special channel known as the sixth sense, or some call it the third eye. And incidentally, about 10% of the cases involve family pets. Even when studying adults and children separately, the results remain remarkably similar. Around 60% of accounts are precognitive, 14% involve clairvoyance, and only 10% involve telepathy. And around 13% of ESP experiences involve visions or hearing that conveys accurate information unknown to the experiencer. And let's face it, most of these cases relate to negative outcomes, possibly death or disaster, although cheerful ones do occur more rarely, such as the prospect of winning the lottery. There are chapters in The Gift on ESP and romance, ESP among children, ESP in war, with some of the most up-to-date material coming from, for example, the Al-Qaeda attack in Yemen on the USS Cole warship in October 2000, when 17 sailors were killed. And less than a year later, The 9/11 World Trade Center outrage occurred in New York, providing still more reports when the Twin Towers collapsed. In addition to this material, the gift also contains 13 anecdotal messages from the dead, which includes apparitions of the deceased appearing at the hour of death to report their demise. In a few cases, the apparition has even been seen simultaneously by more than one person, suggesting a kind of objective existence for the phenomenon. Usually, the messages are just quick goodbyes. They may offer advice or provide information needed to complete unfinished business or to correct a wrong. Michael Schmicker's next book was a novel published in 2015 entitled The Witch of Napoli, seen here. I really enjoyed reading this, and it became an Amazon Top 100 bestseller. We might fairly describe it as a pacey thriller, a fictionalized version of the life of Eusapia Palladino. This is a name many folk interested in psychical research will recognize instantly. There are numerous portraits of her in real life. She was an illiterate Italian peasant woman from southern Italy who became a renowned international medium around the turn of the 20th century. But in Schmicker's novel, her name is changed to Alessandra Poverelli, whom he describes as fiery-tempered, erotic, and with an abusive husband called Pegotti. Another important figure in the novel is a young man called Tomasano, a photographer from whose perspective the story is told. He's purely fictional, whereas other characters in this book are based on historical personalities in the psychical research field. After I finished reading this novel, I recognised the opportunity it offered to discuss just who the real Eusapia was, given that I've never previously referred to her. However, since I made my earlier confession to an increasingly poor memory, you won't be as shocked as I was to discover that I had indeed already covered this medium in a previous documentary produced in October 2020. It's entitled Henry Slade and the Fourth Dimension. What she and Slade had in common was a reputation for cheating, even though they were also genuine mediums. Indeed, when accused, Eusapia did not deny that cheating may happen. She told a reporter, "Some people come to the table expecting tricks. In fact, they want them. I'm in a trance. Nothing happens. They get impatient. They think of tricks, nothing but tricks, and I automatically respond. But it's not often. They will me to do them, that's all." The historical accounts suggest she may have cheated when her powers at a séance were failing her, and the cheating was aimed to prevent sitters being disappointed. Indeed, she acknowledged as much in one séance by declaring, "Hold me tight or I'll cheat." Some of the main scientists who observed Eusapia over a long period claim she was not consciously cheating, since being in trance at the time, she was being responsive to the wishes of spirit entities wanting to use her arms and legs to produce physical phenomena. Both in this novel and in real life, numerous eminent professors across Europe vehemently disagreed with each other about just how crooked her mediumship was. For example, the investigator Dr. Charles Richet, who won the 1913 Nobel Prize for Medicine, declared himself able to give Eusapia the benefit of the doubt over fraud allegations. He referred to her as a kindly soul with many of the instincts of a peasant. I should add that this novel builds up to what we might call a grand finale séance, but I'd be spoiling the story if I told you what happened, so if you're intrigued, you need to obtain the book. So now, let's look at Michael Schmicker's fourth and final book, entitled What Comes Next, published in 2024. It introduces a topic I've not covered before. In a nutshell, quantum physics suggests our consciousness survives death, Schmicker writes. The physical universe is filled with purpose and meaning because we literally help to form the universe. And his attempt to understand quantum physics made a huge difference to how he sees his own place in it, making him more optimistic, he tells us. And that's no bad thing for a man already in his 80s. Schmicker tells us that as a youngster he had two options. A, to accept the religious message that God created us and the world, including the afterlife, but as he grew up he parted company with his parents' Roman Catholic sympathies. Or B, there was Newtonian physics, grounded in materialism, where everything must be measurable, tangible and knowable through the five senses, in which there was no room for a spirit dimension. Once at college, he began questioning everything and valuing truth based on evidence. In the Newtonian view, blind chance created life and the universe with impersonal mechanical laws and its assumption that consciousness is brain function, so human beings can be regarded as mere collections of chemicals, or even meat machines with no immaterial soul. But through his investigations, Schmicker became aware of the hard problem in neuroscience, asking whether or not the purely chemical actions of the brain can be converted into ethereal experiences such as sadness, joy, excitement, curiosity, or love. As he says, atoms don't dream, or hope, or love. If we are merely made of atoms, why do we have these experiences? Consequently, he wondered whether scientists committed to a dogmatic belief in materialism were any different from religions led by dogmatic clerics. His personal breakthrough came with reading about near-death experience research, suggesting that consciousness continues after death, thus answering the puzzle: when the brain and heart stop working, are we simply extinguished? The answer appears to be no, and he describes a very strong NDE case. This appears in both What Comes Next and in Best Evidence, and also, as it happens, it appeared in my first ever Afterlife documentary, This Life, Next Life. It tells of Pam Reynolds, not her real name. During brain surgery, her body temperature was dropped to 60 degrees and her head drained of blood, leaving no measurable brainwaves or heartbeat. Then, after this delicate operation was completed, she was resuscitated. Yet while flatlining, she still had vibrant out-of-body experiences. She viewed from above what the surgeons were doing to her, and then she moved through a dark tunnel to a light and met deceased family members. These tunnels have been part of popular culture for hundreds of years, as seen here in this painting by Hieronymus Bosch, who lived from 1450 to 1516. After Schmicker had studied more NDE cases, he realised they surely invalidate the assumptions of Newtonian science. So what theory adequately replaces Newton? Schmicker had reached his 60s before switching on to quantum physics, and what he termed its hidden hypothesis that consciousness is fundamental to reality and therefore does not die, justifying the existence of an afterlife. After all, standard science still cannot explain the origin of matter, nor the origin of life itself. But quantum physics helps explain the nature of reality, and it legitimizes an afterlife as both scientifically and logically tenable. I've saved the hard science for the back of this book, the author tells us, and although he calls it hard, is far from indigestible, with the whole publication reaching just 170 pages. Inevitably, it refers to the Nobel Prize-winning scientists associated with quantum theory, and Schmicker's digging revealed that the basic building blocks of the material world are not solid themselves. As the Danish scientist Niels Bohr put it, everything we call real is made of things that cannot be regarded as real. And Erwin Schrödinger, another Nobel Prize winner, agreed. Consciousness cannot be accounted for in physical terms, for consciousness is absolutely fundamental, he said. And getting this widely recognised was a truly significant step, declared another Nobel Prize laureate, Brian Josephson. Atoms and subatomic particles simply form a world of potentialities or possibilities, argued Nobel Prize winner Werner Heisenberg. And Max Planck, whom some call the father of quantum theory, agreed. I regard consciousness as fundamental and matter as a derivative of consciousness, he stated. Not that this was his own original thought, since he was beaten to it by the 18th century Scottish poet Thomas Campbell, born 1777. The only thing that is fundamental, real, is consciousness itself. All else is virtual, he declared. For me, this subject is more than complicated, so I fall back on Niels Bohr to feel better about myself. If quantum mechanics hasn't profoundly shocked you, he said, you haven't understood it yet. Well, I can agree about that. I'm shocked and I don't understand it, and probably never will. Which brings me back to Schmicker's inclusion in this book of one of my favourite quotes. It came originally from the 1930 book The Mysterious Universe by the quantum physicist Sir James Jeans. The universe begins to look more like a great thought than a great machine, he wrote. The mind no longer appears to be an accidental intruder into the realm of matter. We ought rather hail it as the creator and governor of the realm of matter. The Copenhagen interpretation was named as such in the 1950s, although its main tenets were developed between 1925 and 1927. Indeed, I can't tell the difference between the Copenhagen interpretation on the one hand and the von Neumann-Eugene-Wigner interpretation on the other. This says we need to think that everything is in waveform until consciousness causes collapse into a fixed manifestation once the wave is subject to observation. And it's argued that when combined with ideas in neuroscience, what we end up with is a viable theory of physical and mental reality, offering clear research options and experimental predictions. Not least, we're invited to remember that quantum theory is not supernatural, but as Schmicker puts it, is simply good science. Although giving up on materialism is both intellectually challenging for many scientists and emotionally painful too. And the same goes for ordinary folk accustomed to living in a solid world. So it's not surprising if skeptics endeavour to keep materialism alive with a rearguard action, even though quantum physics, or mechanics, has proven itself in practical terms. Now, before ending, I must acknowledge that not all scientists accept these ideas, despite their dominance. Schmicker, however, does not include these challenges in his pages, not least because there are over 13 existing interpretations of quantum mechanics. But if you want to, you can find scientists explaining their views online, generally in terms beyond my understanding. Einstein, Sir Roger Penrose, Professor Stuart Hameroff, Professor David Bohm all have reservations, so science won't assume the issue of understanding reality has been cracked once and for all. Nevertheless, all of Schmicker's publications are thought-provoking, and I hope you found this discussion of his psychic world interesting too. Thanks for listening.